Yogyakarta, the heritage city of Indonesia. My name is George Iwan Marantika, the National President of the Indonesian-Australian Business Council. And it is a true honor for me to be able to moderate this very, very significant session, which we will have today, and that is our farewell session to the Australian Ambassador, His Excellency Gary Quinlan AO, the Australian Ambassador in Jakarta. And for that, just for a couple of housekeeping, I want to welcome our members who have joined us today. Welcome, this is an exclusive session for our members. And I want to thank our members who've stuck with us, through thick and thin during this pandemic. And thank you again for your support, and thank you for your trust with IABC. I also want to welcome new members. We have a couple of new members coming in, also I think joining today. First of all, from Nelnet International, coming out of Melbourne, Mr. Joe Egan. Hi, Joe. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, Joe. Yeah. So Joe Egan and Nelnet International is one of the leading education solutions companies globally and listed in New York Stock Exchange. So we thank you. And this is, again, an example of the IACPA in action, where the Australia-Indonesia connection can bring in the globe and promote both countries to the globe. And I also want to thank, joining us today from Monash, Indonesia, I'm Professor Dr. Andrew McIntyre, or Selfie, a new member of ours, Monash, Indonesia. Thank you, Professor Andrew, or Selfie, if you are here. And thank you for joining IABC, and thank you for your trust. Obviously, Monash, Indonesia is one of the, you might say, quick wins of the IACPA signed, which signifies the strength of the education sector in the IACPA. So thank you, Monash, Indonesia, Professor Andrew McIntyre, Selfie of Monash, Indonesia, who have joined IABC as new members. And with that little housekeeping, we'll begin our session today, the farewell session for the Australian Ambassador in Jakarta, His Excellency Ambassador Gary Quinlan AO. And for that, I've asked, representing IABC, my immediate past president, who himself is a distinguished diplomat, and the Indonesian ambassador in Canberra in 2004 to 2008, around 2004, 2008, 2009, and whom I first met, actually, when he was ambassador in the city of Wollongong. So I first met Ambassador Hamzah Tayyab in the city of Wollongong, and obviously he is a very well-known personality in the Indonesian Foreign Ministry in Indonesia. He was also Indonesia's ambassador to the United Kingdom, and one of, you might say, Indonesia's top diplomats in the world today. So Ambassador Hamzah Tayyab, the past president of the Indonesia-Australia Business Council, may I give the floor to you to provide the opening remarks.
Well, thank you so very much, George, and a very good afternoon to everybody, to my very good friend, Gary Quinlan. Since this is more of an informal nature, can I just say, first of all, that I remember when we had the farewell session with Allison, you were here, Gary, and I saw you for the first time. You're back. I thought, okay, now we're going to have him here, resuming his duties as the ambassador in Australia, physically here in Jakarta. But then 2 days after that, I got this email from you, George, from IABC, farewelling Ambassador Gary Quinlan. I said, what is this? You just arrived, and now we're telling him goodbye. But anyway, I think this is the life of diplomats. We come and go. But for me, what is important is that during your watch here, Gary, the IACPA was finalized. We signed it. Now it's all, we need to implement it. And this is a very important document for the relationship. But more than that, I think you were very supportive of all the activities involving both our countries, both our youth, and both our people. We were able to organize the Indonesia-Australia dialogue in Sydney. And actually, we had to host Indonesia, should be the host last year. But of course, we know the COVID pandemic hit everybody. So until now, we are still not able to have it. But more than that, I think you were also supportive of not only the formal relations and the +1 or the more of the people to people, but you're also supportive of the Indonesian language. And because I understand you also met Gus Rizal, who's all the way up there in Bukit Tinggi. He was promoting and trying to enhance the Indonesian language being taught in the schools in Australia. These are events which I think everything happened under your watch. So now that you will have to leave on the 15th, you will be leaving Indonesia. Surely many people will miss you. We all miss you because you have done so much for the relationship. And probably the only thing that I can say is thank you so very much for your support, for your efforts in enhancing the relationship, bringing it to a higher level. And my only hope is that when you leave, I hope you take the memories, enjoyable memories from Indonesia. And I hope you will also remember the event when the IABC held the year-end party. And I still have the video, Gary. You were dancing there on the floor. I still have it. And that is probably, you will remember that. And well, all the best of luck in your future endeavors, whatever that will be. Probably you will get more serious, well, not serious, but more responsibilities, bigger responsibilities. So good luck and all the best wishes. Thank you, George.
Thank you, Ambassador Hamza Tayyip, for those opening remarks. And I think it is fitting for this farewell session to be opened by Ambassador. And as we move forward to the next topic, and that it will be a remark and speech from Ambassador Gary, I first would like to share with all of you that I met Ambassador Gary around 2004 in Singapore. And I had the chance to accompany His Majesty, the Sultan of Yogyakarta, to a dinner at the residence of the High Commissioner of the Ambassador of Australia in Singapore, and that was Ambassador Gary. And we were very impressed by his courtesy, his diplomacy, and his kindness. So when we heard that Ambassador Gary would be the ambassador here in Indonesia, we were very excited and we were very happy. And I think Indonesia really appreciates, Ambassador, your contribution as the ambassador of Australia to Indonesia, because during your tenure, the IACPA was ratified and then it was entered into force on the 5th of July of last year. So I think that is one of the biggest economic bilateral agreements for Indonesia. And we thank you for your contribution and services. And with that, Ambassador Gary, the floor is yours. You can say anything you want, whatever is in your mind. We are ready to hear and listen and then to engage. Please, Ambassador Gary, the floor is yours.
Okay. Terima kasih, George. Thank you very, very much. And look, thank you and your predecessors, Pak Hamza, of course, and Pak Nokke, and always, of course, Pak Mutarianto, for all the support, help, and above all, friendship during the last 3 years. And it is 3 years. I presented credentials in April 2018, this week. Earlier this week was my 3-year anniversary. And unfortunately, it's only a 3-year term. So, you know, I had to return. COVID, of course, blew that out of the water, but I've still been acting every single day, Zooms, WebExes, webinars, everything. Sitting sometimes in an office in Canberra, putting on a batik shirt, having a photo of the embassy behind me, not a blank wall. So try to create, you know, the ecosystem that we were all living through, because people in Jakarta who I was talking to, or other parts of Indonesia, were equally doing things remotely, virtually, sitting in, you know, their houses or their offices sometimes, and so on. So we all had to adapt, and we all did. And I think the amazing thing is the remarkable thing to me personally, it may not have been to some others, is how quickly people were able to adapt to the need to keep up the momentum of talking to each other, conversing and doing what business we could despite the extraordinary obstacles. It's easy to say, oh, we all found new ways of doing things and so on and so forth. Of course we did, because we needed to, but we were committed to doing that because not everybody, not all sectors of our society adapted that quickly. And there are some parts of all our communities which went backwards. And although some aspects of business, of international business did, very much so, in the case of Indonesia and Australia, you know, when you look at the trade statistics alone, the drop was not all that great. It was in some areas, tourism, education, disastrous. But in other areas, there actually was an increase in some trade, both ways. But overall, it was really only a decline of about 6%. And looking at the global context, that's not too bad. But business kept up what engagement we could, and that's good for the future, although we've got a huge amount of work to do to really capitalise on any of that. Look, one thing I should also acknowledge is the history of the IABC. It's now over 30 years. It's a very strong part of our engagement with each other, but it can be stronger because these sorts of things always can be. And I want to acknowledge the work that's been going on within the IABC preceding COVID to recalibrate and look again whether how your own group exists, how it operates, to make sure that it's as contemporary and relevant as can be. All organisations, our embassy, our government, everything, all our institutions and organisations need to do that periodically. And this is pre-COVID. That was the great opportunity, driven by the fact we had IABC. There it was, and if it was going to be exploited, we wanted to make sure that all sorts of business components, it applies equally to the AIBC in Australia, were actually fit for purpose. And all I mean by that is you guys took the lead in doing that yourselves, with yourselves, and that was exactly the right time to do it. And I just want to say how impressed I was by that and how important it is, obviously. Diplomats, of course, always, you know, at these moments like to talk things up, or we always talk things up, or we talk things down, depending on what the diplomatic objective is. But often it's talking things up. But Pak Hamza has done it for me. He said, what a brilliant performance. Nothing's ever been better than during my term. I'm glad you noticed that, Pak Hamza. You've saved me the need to say that. But quite seriously, nothing to do with me, but the term, the last 3 years, and particularly pre-COVID, those 2 years, which were fairly intense, were a significantly expanding sweet spot in what is a very long historical relationship. We were the first country to engage with Indonesia after independence. We supported you, as you know, within a month of the declaration. And then we were asked by President Sukarno to represent Indonesia in the negotiations in the UN, ultimately leading to UN independence. 3 countries, the United States, Belgium obviously representing the Dutch, and Australia representing you. A perfect start. And then, of course, it evolves. What I like to say is, you know, 75 years, and that's what it is, has seen Indonesia change enormously. It's become independent. It's gone through its own history, cyclically. It's emerged into a new Indonesia, a new phase the last 20 years. But at the same time, Australia has changed. Because when Indonesia declared independence, Australia was only 42 years old. And, you know, we had all sorts of constitutional links. We still have one or two too many. I'm a Republican, one of the founders of the Australian Republic movement, in fact. And we still need to, maybe make a break or two. But we were only just emerging as a country ourselves and changing, because after the Second World War, we opened up to immigration in cycles during the 50s and 60s. then different immigration in the 70s from the Middle East and Africa, then more and more and more, so that nowadays we are the most successful the most mixed multicultural society, not the biggest, of course, in terms of absolute numbers, but the most mixed. And that has seen Australia change over that 75 period where Indonesia has emerged and defined itself. So, and we're neighbours, we're next door to each other. I mention that only because we quite literally have been on parallel journeys, not the same, but parallel journeys to find and define who we are. And increasingly, that focuses on who we can be together, whatever differences of history, political culture originally, not so much now, and everything else that we've had. So it genuinely is, if you look back over that really long arc, that is the sort of ecosystem that really is defining where we are now, where we're going in the future. Look, politically, we've never been closer. Strategically, we're facing the same challenges. We're both looking at the change in the region, realising how fast and profound it is. We will make different choices in policy and response, but driven by the same concerns for how each one of us can make ourselves resilient as a society and a nation in the face of such change. And each of us have discovered that the way to do that, of course, is to do it together where we can. And increasingly, that's in a bigger and bigger and bigger space between the two of us. And this is genuine. This is a sea change in our relations because we live in the same strategic ecosystem and it's changing. And we're protecting it to make sure that it survives well. Look, the economic area is not the hardest, it's hard. People to people in some way is the hardest, and I'll come back to that. I mean, on the economic side, we've got IHEPA in place. It came into force last July, but it's now, of course, as we all know, that the games begin. And intense activity is needed on trade, but really investment. And there's still far too little investment between both countries. There's a little bit more Australian investment in Indonesia, I think, than had been realised 12 months ago, but not enough, nowhere near enough. I had good discussions with Pak Luhut during the week about certain aspects of this, including in relation to the INA, the so-called Sovereign Wealth Fund, which is a different kind of fund, really, and things like that. And also to get the latest readout, because I saw Pak Langer and had a good hour-long meeting with him 2 days ago as well, and then Sri Mulyani for an hour. That was particularly, they're all enjoyable meetings, but it's always particularly great with her, was to talk about further change in the economy here, the omnibus law, of course, where are the implementing regulations going to take us, but also further fiscal, financial, tax reform, and to talk about those kind of issues which are going to influence, again, the business ecosystem, because Australian businesses genuinely are asking questions about this, because there's a new appetite for engagement, and that reflects a broader appetite to diversify our trade, to get more integrated supply systems, all of which we all have similar ambitions about. But for the first time, it's more serious as an interest. We have to make sure we help business exploit that interest. So that's what our big objective is now. I might note that with Sally Dean, who's on your board, of course, and is the Austrade senior representative with Sally, her team, Todd, who's on this call, and his team and others, Alison, who's just moved to another position in Canberra. We have done, in the last few months, 67 events reaching over 6,500 Australian business people and Indonesian business people about the opportunity presented by CHEPA. And we've tried to segment the approach, some of which we've done jointly with you and other business partners, to not only just talk rhetoric about, yeah, this is the possibility, great opportunity, new platform, all the usual stuff, but actually trying to get in and say, in this sector, whether it's METS or healthcare, agribusiness, tech startups, financial, whatever it is, these are the more specific opportunities. We in Australia are about to publish really soon what we're calling the blueprint for future economic engagement, with a focus on specific business areas and opportunities. So that'll be a great thing. In terms of new areas, I would say people to people. You know, it's very difficult to measure people to people because ultimately it depends on how we feel about each other, but also how we feel about each other reflects what we know about each other. And we just don't know enough about each other. You get 1.3 million Australian tourists pre-COVID going to Bali. Only 200,000 of them ever went anywhere else in the archipelago, despite our efforts to get them to get out, you know, and see a few other places. So when the borders are open again, and hopefully vaccinations will be the key solution, well, obviously they are, as to when that can happen, we're really going to have to give a hugely renewed focus on that. Education worries me profoundly. It's all about youth, and it's about the collaborative partnerships in research, analysis and business cooperation in the future by the young generation. We run such a bad, serious risk of going backwards. We were starting to make good progress because of COVID and the closure of the borders. That's an area that worries me in many ways more than any other in where we're going together in the future. There is a pickup in interest in research collaboration between our key universities. In both countries, this is great. I helped launch a new partnership with the AIC, the Australia-Indonesia Council, last week, Harold Mitchell and his mob. New opportunities there, and certainly big new opportunities because of necessity in public health security, where we've been doing a lot with each other during the pandemic, but we're only scratching the surface of what we can, and certainly at the Australian end, with key people here planning to open up in the future. Look, they're just a few areas of new opportunity. I have to say, you know, it's good to be back, but it's not good to be going. And I mean that very sincerely, and people know I speak my mind as it is. I've run into problems with the Australian media and even my own foreign minister on one or two occasions as a result of that. But I really am going to miss being here because, look, it's vital, it's important, all of that. We know that's why I'm here and why I wanted to be here. But it's also fun, and because there's untapped opportunity. And that's what makes it even more fun. Because, you know, by tapping and starting to tap, particularly in some of the people-to-people areas, but also the economic and the research collaboration areas, and maritime. Another big priority for me was to try and get more maritime operational cooperation and research. You feel that you might be able to just help shift the dial a little bit to make a difference. So that all sounds a bit self-important, but it really has been a few of the motivations in how I've approached this. I have to say, in Pak Cristiato Lagoa, my counterpart in Canberra, we have been on the same mission in each other's countries, and I want to acknowledge that to you guys, how very, very important that has been for me to know that Pak Chris was there, and we were doing things together in Australia and in Indonesia to promote business. We do it together. It was his idea. He suggested it to me, and I said, of course, let's do it if we can and when we could. So I just wanted to acknowledge the tremendous, impact he had in enabling me to do whatever I've been able to do, and me to help likewise. My successor arrives really, really, really quickly. May indeed already have arrived last night and is in quarantine. I mean, that's a bit of hot news for you. Don't publicise it everywhere. This is an unusual thing to do, but we did not want a gap, given the fact we've had this year of COVID, because the relationship's too important. And my successor, who will start after I leave, of course, we're anticipating early presentation of credentials to ensure they can get underway and meet everybody as quickly as possible in country. So you'll be hearing and seeing the announcement really quickly, and we've both talked to each other quite a bit about what's been happening here and opportunity. They'll bring their own particular lens to all of that. Yeah, there's a bit of experience there, and unlike me, fluent Bahasa Indonesia. So this it's a good asset. So it's great to acknowledge that that will be the case, because I felt so inadequate at times because I just didn't have the opportunity to spend, you know, the 6 months that I'd hoped to. But listen, thank you so much for making it fun, including on the dancing night, you know, sort of that New Year's Eve event. I don't think I was the last person to leave. I don't think you thought you could get rid of me that night, but it was an indicator of what I need. So thank you. Terima kasih.
Thank you, Ambassador Gary, and thank you for your remarks and your sharing of your thoughts, and thank you for the hot news that you just gave us today. I just wanted to share again, this is an exclusive event, so only members only. So obviously, I think everybody can keep all that hot news confidential. But that is, thank you for sharing all of that. And obviously, Ambassador Gary, some people text me just to send their greetings to you. Phil Turtle, our sister organization chairman or president in AIBC, and sends greetings and wishes you the best. And also previously, Ambassador Chris Logo actually also shares with me how such a good friendship he has with you, and that you are an excellent ambassador. So thank you for sharing those thoughts, Ambassador Gary. And we're going to have now some remarks. And after the remarks will be a question and answer that we will also ask for you to share your thoughts on the question and answers. But beforehand, we will have some remarks or tribute remarks for you, Ambassador Gary, or to you. And the first tribute remark will be shared by a senior board member of ours, Mr. Peter Fanning, who has joined us today, one of the most senior Australian businessmen in Indonesia, and a top corporate lawyer in Indonesia. So with that, I will allow Peter Fanning to share his thoughts and tribute remarks. Peter, the Zoom.
Thanks, George. Okay, thanks, George. My connection is not real good, and I'm not talking about with you lot. That if I drop out, my apology in advance. But I think a few of are having the same trouble by the looks of my screen in front of me. But I think you would be aware that Gary would have set a few records during his time here. One of the records that he would have set would be the lowest consumption of wine out of the residence in an ambassador's time, unfortunately, because we absolutely enjoyed the camaraderie which he offered us and the opportunities that we had to join him at the residence. But if there's too much wine there left, Gary, there's a couple of us that are quite willing to drive a truck up later and help you out. But there you are, because I'm just thinking of your successor who might not have the same taste. So we should be ready and willing to help out. You've had some very difficult. You've had an incredible career. A couple of stints, as I notice, a couple of stints as president of the UN Security Council. And I asked the question without expecting an answer, with which was more difficult, dealing with the chattering boffins in DFAT in Canberra or the UN Security Council. I can guess at the answer. But a fellow of your background, a a provincial Australian like myself, unlike myself, a lad from Newcastle, would be full of resilience and able to handle whatever challenges. And obviously you were able to handle the challenges thrown at you, given all the iron you chewed in your growing up days in the industrial capital of Newcastle. Great place, nice place. Unfortunately, they're right now, or have been, hosting a surf tournament that should be at Bells Beach, but we'll fix that up later. And enough of that. But you, I notice amongst your achievements was lead negotiator on maritime matters in relation to the Antarctic. And I'm sure many people have asked you what language the penguins spoke, but I'm also sure that that joke is well and truly worn out. But what an incredible experience dealing with all the countries with an interest in Antarctica, besides the penguins. But at the other end, you played a significant role with our northern neighbour Timor-Leste. You've been in many parts of the world, but the biggest problems were most probably closer to home, bigger simply because they have a more immediate effect. And I'm sure your successes, yes, in dealing with the events in Timor-Leste will have given you a lot of satisfaction, and so they should. So, Gary, an incredibly diverse career. We do hope that your experience in Indonesia, interrupted though it was, will figure in your memoirs as a significant time, and we thank you sincerely. Thanks, George.
Thank you, Peter, and thank you for sharing Ambassador Gary, a distinguished career, a very distinguished career, and contribution obviously to Australia, but also in this matter, contribution to Indonesia throughout the career of Ambassador Gary. And I want to also, thank Ambassador Gary on the behalf of IABC for assigning your top diplomats, such as the Senior Commissioner of Austrade and your Counselor of Economic Affairs, Sally Dean, Senior Commissioner of Austrade, and Counselor of Economic Affairs, Todd Diaz, assigned to the IABC board as our advisor. So thank you, Ambassador. Before we go on, I also want to recognize here, I see Consul General Chris Barnes coming in from Surabaya, I believe. Thank you, Chris, for joining. And Consul General Chris Barnes, when I joined IABC, you were the president of AIBC, Australia-Indonesia Business Council, way back in 2011. So thank you for joining today. Now, we go now to the next tribute remark, and it's coming from one of our founding fathers of IABC, only one of 4 Indonesians that have an Australian order, and the only private sector Indonesian that has an AO. I think the other 3 were the President of Indonesia and the Indonesian foreign ministers. So I want to give the floor to our advisor emeritus of IABC, our founding father of IABC. He is obviously a very distinguished businessman, chairman of Petrolog, chairman of DB Shankar in Indonesia, and commissioner emeritus of Coca-Cola Amatil Indonesia, one of the people who established Coca-Cola Indonesia. So I want to give the floor to our senior board member, our advisor emeritus, representing IABC and all the past presidents that have built IABC and the past board members who have built IABC, to say a few words as a tribute remark to Ambassador Gary. Pak Muktarianto, the Zoom
Thank
floor.
you.
Silakan, Bapak. Yeah.
Thank you, Pak. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. We can hear you.
Okay. Pak Gary Quinlan, I listened to your speech, which is so sincere to us in Indonesia. Except of course, business matters which you are dealing with, but your speech is really very, very promising. And I'm so proud that I can say something to you to say goodbye to my friend, Pak Gary Quinlan, because we know each other for not so many time. So not so long, but quite often, I think. I'm not anymore involved in the day-to-day business of IABC, but I still listen, I still follow the relationship between Indonesia and Australia. And certainly, Pak Gary, we will miss your encouragements and thank you for the years of service working together with you. It is really something which is very precious to us that our relationship is so close. I'm incredibly unhappy and sad that you will leave Indonesia for good, you know. And there is something which we cannot avoid, and we have to follow it. It is something which I would say that the sea of choppy, especially where the first point you temporarily left for Australia when the pandemic declared last March, last year, but you came with the spirit of unity. Together we can overcome any problems. You lead us through lots of successes in the relationships of both Indonesia and Australia. And as a leader, you deeply exercise the spirit of Pancasila and lives of Indonesian and its culture and business trading, as well as in diplomatic relations. You should ask the secret to success is friendship, mutual understanding, and the gotong services. In the embassy, I heard that you showed the staff that the secret of people services are the hard work, training and coaching, and perseverance. I'm so sorry to see that you have to go. Today, the Australian embassy will lose the great leader in Indonesia as a mentor as well. You were not given only an order, but you gave direction and conclusions to both embassy and the association. I know that you will reign success in your next stages of life. We will all pray to God to continue leading you in the best ways for the next challenge. You arrive in Indonesia as a boss, is His Excellency Ambassador, but now you depart as a friend. Truly, you are more of a friend to us in Indonesia than less of colleagues. You are our true brother to all of us in Indonesia. And finally, Pak Gary, we wish you a fullness of life and happiness. And may God bless and thank you very much. There is something which I gave my words to Pak Gary as a friend, a true friend of Pak George. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pak Muktaryanto. Thank you. And Pak Muktaryanto, our advisor emeritus, founder of IABC, and the commissioner emeritus of Coca-Cola Amatil Indonesia. Thank you, sir. And now we're going to have some of our members representing our member base say a few words as a tribute remark to Ambassador Gary Quinlan. I know if I'm looking at the time, we're going to be a bit over. We started late, so we'll be a bit over. But I think this is a special session because we're like Pak Muktarianto said, we're saying farewell to a friend. And I think this is a special session. So thank you, Pak Muktarianto. Right now, we're going to hear a few words, a tribute remark to Ambassador Gary Quinlan by the CEO, the Chief Executive Officer of ANZ Bank Indonesia, which is a very strong supporter of IABC, Mr. Mark Fitzgerald. Mark, the Zoom floor is yours.
Thank you very much for that, George, and it's a real pleasure to be able to speak at this farewell session and actually to listen to some of the remarks and thoughts of people who have been speaking also. But look, I think it's been great for Indonesia and Australia having somebody here of Gary's seniority and experience, and Mutarianto kind of highlighted some of that earlier, as did Peter Fanning and others as well. I think that's really important. I think because of that, Gary's helped shine a spotlight on the relationship in its broadest context. I know Gary's been a huge presence here for Australian interests in Indonesia and helping to connect businesses and the business community here. And listening to Gary's remarks, and reflecting on about IABC in 30 years, I hadn't quite realized some of that context, but really important. And clearly, Gary, you've thrown out the challenge there for IABC to also, build on that connection both with the embassy and, across the business community. So I think that's really appreciated. You're a challenger, and we've heard a little bit of that today, and so that's really great. Look, you've done a lot. I think you've organised round tables. A memorable one for me was the round table with Kevin Rudd. But obviously, there's been several prime ministerial visits as well, and they've also been incredibly important for the relationship. And all of that, all I have seen from you is your passion, your enthusiasm. You've always been incredibly well informed. You have a deep appreciation of the history, but a clear view of where forward, and incredibly thoughtful, and so great insights. And again, you kind of just listening to your remarks kind of highlights all of that and what we will miss. I think you have helped build a much deeper understanding of the issues, but also the opportunities for the Australian business community. So that's kind of one side. With this pandemic and things, I know, Gary, you've had to spend a lot of time back in Australia, not through your choice, but I know through my own colleagues and networks in Australia that you've been a very passionate advocate for Indonesia in Australia and helping to correct misperception, helping to use the levers of government more effectively to build and deepen the relationship. So I think that's been incredibly important. At a personal level, it's been great getting to know you, Gary. You leave very big shoes to fill, not just a very big walls for paintings to fill, but very big shoes for the incoming or the next ambassador. And on that, I just wish you all the best and hope that our paths cross again. So thank you, and over to you, George.
Thank you, Mark. And again, thank you for ANZ for your support for IABC, and obviously a major bank in Indonesia, ANZ Bank Indonesia, the CEO, Mark Fitzgerald. Thank you very much, sir, for those remarks. And now we move on again, representing our member base, a tribute to our Ambassador Gary Quinlan, by Tim Delahunty, the director of CBA, or PT Commonwealth Bank in Indonesia. But Tim, and he's also the vice president of IABC on our board. Please, Pak Tim, the Zoom floor is yours.
Thank you very much, George. And look, it's an incredible honour to be in present company and having the opportunity to provide a tribute to our ambassador, Gary. And probably aligned with my short time here in Indonesia, I'll keep my tribute appropriately short and hopefully make some time up, George, with our agenda. Gary, I provide these comments on behalf of both myself and the Commonwealth Bank. And maybe just something very interesting to start. I share something with Gary, and that's the fact that we're both from very great steel cities of New South Wales and Australia. And Gary, of course, being a Novocastrian and myself being from Wollongong, south of Sydney. And you know, why do I say this in this forum? One thing I noticed, Gary, in the first time that I was introduced to you, is that you brought with you a very personable nature, a conversationalist, someone that was very interested and down to earth and up for a yarn, I would say. And coming, you know, relatively new to Indonesia, that's certainly something that I appreciated, and I very much saw that shine through. And what I would say is that it's not something that is common in someone so senior as probably one of Australia's most senior and experienced and respected diplomats. And look, that same courteous nature was extended to when Gary made the very kind offer for our Deputy CEO of the Commonwealth Bank of Australia, Mr. David Cohen, to join Gary in a lunch in January 2020. And we talked about all manner of things, CBA in Indonesia, IHFA, etc. And although the world changed soon after this luncheon, in light of COVID, Gary, what I hope is that your very kind offer to speak to our board in Australia about all things Indonesia, the opportunity that business has here, and what Commonwealth Bank can achieve here through your experience and the relationships that you've fostered. I think that would be something so valuable for the Commonwealth Bank of Australia, and certainly something that if that option and that offer is still on the table, I'd be doing whatever I can to make that happen. On behalf of Australian businesses here in Indonesia, of which I represent, as George mentioned, as an honoured member of the Indonesian-Australia Business Council, on behalf of Commonwealth Bank of Australia, PT Bank Commonwealth, Lauren Sulistiyawati, our President Director, and of course myself, we wish you all the best, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Pat Tim. Thank you. Very good. Thank you, Pat Tim. And thank you also for, you know, the support that you and our members, including Commonwealth Bank, have supported IABC. Thank you, Pat Tim. Yeah. And now we're going to hear from two other members and representing other sectors. So we've heard from the banking financial sector, but now we're going to hear from the education sector first, from Ibu Mariam Kartika Resni, who is also our Vice President on the IABC board, but also the Country Director of UTS InSearch in Indonesia. So the Zoom floor is yours, Ibu Mariam.
Thank you so much, Pat George and Ambassador Gary Quinlan. Thank you for this opportunity to be able to say goodbye to you, you know, formally through the session, but also in this informal session, because I'd like to mention just a few things that I remember about you when I first met you. I think as an ambassador, you've been very personable, very easy to talk to, and I understand that you know, I'm very sorry, my son just came in. Sorry. Sorry, that's my 4-year-old son. He just barged in, so sorry about that. Yeah, and I wanted to mention that what you talked about people to people, that we must like people if we want to, but it's how important that is. I think you represent very well what we would like to interact, the people that we like to interact with Australia, and that attitude and that personality that you bring with us are the people that we can you know, connect with and hope and help this relationship with Indonesia. So I'd like to thank you for being that and bringing that as Ambassador of Australia to Indonesia. I'm personally Indonesian, but I represent UTS, University of Technology Sydney College here, and having that connection with the different, with Australians and Indonesians working together, that's how it will work and how we can develop the connections and move this forward. So I thank you for that. I remember what you know about, sorry. Oh, sorry, he refuses to go. Sorry. Okay. Okay, yeah. Sorry about this. So I remember when you came, you're one of the ambassadors that actually provided dinner, sit down, and that's very Indonesian. And I think that's something you understand very well about our culture. And that type of understanding, I think, is what will bring our countries together and would help further in all the other sectors and businesses that we want to develop in the partnership. So those are the things that I'll remember you personally, and I'd like to thank you for that. And also, I remember all the luncheons and how genuinely concerned you are about the input that you get from the industry. And you also mentioned that the education industry is one that you are very concerned about, and it is a very tough environment for the education industry currently for Australia. And we understand that it is very important for somebody from in your caliber to bring back to Australia to explain the importance of this sector and the challenges that we're facing at the moment with COVID and how we are currently surviving. And also someone who understands the importance of education and how that would foster future relationships between the countries. And this is these connections and relationship is what's going to help all the industrial sectors together, and we can improve this relationship, support ISEPA in the future. So I'd like to thank you and also for your friendship to us, and even for somebody who doesn't know you we don't, it doesn't go back so far as some of the more senior members. I think I still have a very, very clear and great memory of your personable, your character, and I wish you the best in your future, and I hope you'll come back to Indonesia again in the future, and we can connect again with you being here. So thank you so much, Ambassador Quinn.
Thank you, Bu Mariam, representing the education sector in our member base. Now, representing the agricultural sector in our member base, we still have two more, and then Dr. John Ackerman will ask some questions that he has accumulated from our members. But representing the agricultural sector from our member base, a tribute to Ambassador Gary Quinlan from Dr. Faliska of MLA. Dr. Faliska, please.
Thank you, George. And thank you as well for the opportunity to provide this tribute to you, Ambassador. This may sound weird, but I actually think that it's actually a positive that in the past few years during your tenure here, that the livestock and the red meat industry has not had to call upon you as often as we have had to for some of your predecessors. I actually think that that's actually a great positive. And what Peter said, in terms of you have the least wine consumption, I'd like to think that you've actually made up for that with your hosting of embassy dinners, beef and red meat packed events. So appreciate your time with us. However, may I also add that for those occasions where we do have to call upon you, that you have always been very available and accessible to us, to the red meat sector and to the cattle sector. We know that we did have our usual road bumps with beef and buffaloes, breeders and boats, the usual hiccups. But I really appreciated that you've always been there to listen and also then to follow up and make representations on all these things. I hope, however, that you'll remember us by not these things, but rather the times you spend visiting farms and feedlots and the many barbecues and dinners where we are celebrating the best of Australia and the best of Indonesia. As a member of IABC and on behalf of the red meat industry, I really thank you for your steadfast support for the most significant, in my opinion, and arguably the largest trade between Indonesia and Australia. I thank you for all you've done in representing us through the ISEPA, through the implementation, and in your promotion of the red meat industry behind the scenes or in front of all the diplomats and in front of all the stakeholders. And I certainly hope that you'll go back to Australia and continue to be a vocal and passionate advocate for the agriculture sector. Before the end of your term, hopefully you'll be able to join us for another virtual event, dinner event at some point. And hopefully we'll be able to invite you to one of our events in the future back in Australia as well. Ambassador, thank you once again. And all the very best in the future.
Thank you, Dr. Valeska from MLA. Thank you for those remarks. And now we have with us our board members. Obviously, I'd like to recognize Pat Dharma, Pat David. I see Pat Ben Giles and all of our friends here. Obviously, Pat Peters and Pat Tim has made remarks. But representing the board who has collected some questions for you, Ambassador Gary, from our members, is Dr. John Ackerman, the treasurer of IABC and a leading also agriculture businessman and entrepreneur here in Indonesia. So Dr. John Ackerman, the Zoom floor is yours.
Thank you very much, George. I should start off firstly by asking whether everybody can hear me. Okay, fantastic. I very much look forward to the day when the statement, John, you're still on mute, is heard far less often than it currently is. But let me take the opportunity to also thank you, Ambassador, for taking the time out with us for IABC and the business community. After we sent out the invitation, a number of questions started to roll in from some of our members in the hope that we might have a bit of time to run through some of them. Unfortunately, there's probably too many for me to read out and get you to answer in the time that we have left. So what I thought I might do is just sort of give a very, very quick sort of brief overview of the questions themselves and try and roll it into one big mega question, because all of them have a theme running through them, and it's essentially about the future. And not just about the relationship, but people were personally interested in yourself as well, Gary. And I think that probably reflects a lot of the comments where people have talked about obviously your wealth of experience and knowledge, your personal approach, being able to tell it exactly as it is. And that's obviously reflected in some of the questions that have come through. So people were interested in whether you see a future role for yourself in the region, and particularly in further deepening the Australia-Indonesia relationship. There were questions about IACPA, obviously being fairly recently signed and entered into. And without getting caught up on some of the COVID interruptions that have happened, what your hopes are for the CEPA, particularly around people movement, obviously trade and investment, but the relationship more broadly over the coming sort of 5 to 10 year period. But importantly also, what do you think industry and government need to do to make those hopes a reality? You know, what's your advice to both industry and government to ensure that we move it? Particularly, and I refer to something or other that you actually said in your earlier comments about the huge amount of work to do to capitalise on what we've achieved to date. And in sort of a similar direction, and coming back to your personal approach and telling it as it is, and hoping not to get you into any further trouble on this, but wondered whether you could give us an indication of what you might be briefing your successor on. What direction do you think they should be pursuing? So the questions are really are you able to give us insight into your future, your hopes for CEPA and the broader relationship, your suggestions for industry and government, and including your suggestions, including for your successor. So I'll hand it over to you, Ambassador, and again, thank you very much.
Please, Ambassador, the Zoom floor is yours. I believe you're on. Go ahead, Ambassador.
Yep, I think you can hear me now, can you? Yeah. Okay. Listen, thank you. And and also very much for the extraordinary generosity of commentary. That's I don't want to sound silly or facile or whatever. It really does, you know, touch you when you come to this moment. You're trying to assess whether you have actually been able to achieve even a tiny bit of what you'd hoped you'd be able to do. So that's great. Look, just very quickly to dispense with my own future, because, you know, I mean, gosh, I was our youngest diplomat ever, or actually our second youngest, I now discover. I was 7 years younger than the average recruitment age in my year many years ago. And what it means is I've worked longer, you know, in diplomacy. I've also worked in the political system in Australia as a senior advisor, chief of staff, including to a former prime minister, but also to a minister in different domestic portfolios. So when I think about myself, to the extent that you ever get the chance to do that, and my history, it's been an unusual history for a diplomat. I'm the only person in our diplomatic history who's spent a lot of time working in the domestic sphere to try and bring domestic reform. I don't mean to say I did something wonderful and big and magic, but I was there when we were recreating ourselves as a nation. I was young at the time, you know, in the 80s and 90s. And it's given me a tremendous amount of enjoyment in seeing the change that's happened in my own country, but also how that's been reflected in the relationship closer and closer, still not in any sense perfect, because these things can never be, with the region. So I do want to spend a little bit of the time that, you know, remains to me continuing to work on that kind of thing with a regional focus, also a global focus. I still have a lot of interest. I've spent a lot of my professional career also working in multilateralism, either negotiating agreements and treaties, including the Timor-Leste, you know, maritime boundaries most recently. But prior to that, a lot of work in the UN, both in New York twice, once for 6 years as ambassador in the Security Council and so on, but also as a diplomatic brat when I was a junior first secretary in New York in the 80s, you know, working on the development side. And I had a brief period at the World Bank many years ago as well, on international economic reform and things. So I'd like to be able to continue that kind of interest. I had been actually planning retirement after Jakarta, because, to be honest, from DFAT, from Foreign Affairs and Trade, because, to be honest, there's really nowhere else for me to go in terms of DFAT. I've sort of done some of the most exciting points to me, and ending up in Jakarta has been unique after other things I've done. So I was thinking of looking to other things. There's a couple of think tanks who've, you know, would like me to do the occasional op-ed and a bit of commentary and chair things, and a couple of universities. So I'll, with a focus on the region, people who are interested in the broad region, East Asia and Southeast Asia as well, and that includes Indonesia. So I hope to be doing some continuing work on that. In terms of the relationship, you know, over the next 5 to 10 years, we are existing at a period when we're experiencing the fastest change in human history, apart from major disruptive events like World Wars I and II. And of course COVID, which has been the most disruptive event globally for the world since World War II. But the pace of technological change and the immediacy of its effect on our economic and social structures, and the challenges for government in trying to keep pace, just keep up with the new challenges thrown up every day by technological change, both good and bad. So the world is in a very volatile situation. So our relationship is going to reflect that volatility, because we're both trying to deal with it. So I go back to that point about each one of us, each of our countries, discovering each other in a new context, and that is the context of that volatility. And so we've got to make that resilient relationship work, and that's going to take quite a bit of effort. The settings are all there. Politically, never been better. All of that is true. but we have to actually operationalize that in a way in which it means more and more. And we are doing that. We're increasing what we talk to each other about in government. And that's tremendously important. It may sound so simplistic as people say, well, of course, you must talk to each other. But talking to each other far more intimately about how we assess developments regionally and globally, and then what we can do together to actually help change and shape those developments. Now, it's operationalizing that kind of conversation, and that's we're well down the path of we've always spoken to each other. I mean, when you think about the history of Indonesia and Australia, we've both worked together on some of the big changes in our region. APEC, East Asia Summit, Cambodia Peace Process, ASEAN Regional Forum on Security, WTO reform. These kind of issues, we have always worked very, very closely with each other on those things, and they have helped shape the institutional structure of our region and the way in which countries operate within that system and talk to each other. So we've always been doing that. But what we're now doing and have begun doing much more on a daily basis is talking to each other much more about what all of that means and what further influences we can bear with each other on all of this. So I think that's going to be the big thing that we'll be doing more and more about. Both of us will be keeping a very close eye on great power competition. That's the most prevailing dynamic in international relations now, the international system, great power competition. And it's not just the United States and China, although that is the decisive fault line. But, you know, I'm an optimist about all of these things. And we have an ability to help shape reactions to how that works its way through the global system and certainly in the Indo-Pacific. And we're doing more and more of that. And that's where a lot of effort will go in. We will make some different choices along the way, because obviously we will, because we're different countries in ourselves, but we also discover we're far less different in having common interests, which we can join together to help shape all of that. So I think that's pretty exciting. Look, Chapter, I mean, as I said, one of the big focuses, I think, certainly Australia needs to focus on so much more, but also Indonesia, is investment, getting that investment ecosystem right. And that means working in Indonesia on ensuring the degree of economic reform which makes the economy more open. I don't mean not controlled and all that sort of thing, but more open to investors like us, to encourage those who are cautious. It'll take quite a long time to change some of the mindset which is wrong among Australian investors, but not all of their worries, are imagined. So we do have to work together on the changed Indonesian economic environment, and also what lessons there are for us as well. When I meet with Indonesian investors in Australia, and I have, including in Newcastle, I said at a visit 2 years ago, what's your biggest problem to an Indonesian company? Significant. What is your biggest problem operating in Australia? And I thought it was going to be, environmental regulations are so difficult and complex and take so long. The Indonesian investors said to me, no, we learned how to look after that some years ago. We understand all that. They said the biggest problem is raising finance for any investment associated with, in this case, it was fossil fuel, which is seen to be going, by 2050, the world commitment now to zero targets. So this investment, which was great and potentially going to expand, suddenly was facing those kind of regulatory problems. So it's a changing economic environment, both countries, but trying to understand those changes and the impact on investors is going to be pretty important for where we go in the future. We will never be, Australia is, the 13th largest economy in the world. Indonesia is the 15th largest economy. You'll be bigger than us in not too far a distant future. But the real issue is not the comparative size, but the comparative competitiveness of each of our economies and the ability to do things together in a more integrated way, whether it's through supply chains, export to third countries or whatever as a result of an integrated supply chain. So those are sorts of issues and things which I think we've got to put a lot more sophisticated analytic focus on for the economic future. It's easy to talk words like this, but people have been doing some of this in the past. We need to do so much more of it now. What I'll be briefing my successor about, I've already spent time briefing my successor, is precisely what I said in the beginning, actually. These are the new areas I think I certainly have been conscious of and wanting to put more focus on, including the research collaborations and all the rest, and youth, because, and it's one thing I will say, look, when I arrived 3 years ago, I called on various ambassadors in Jakarta and said, you know, how do you work here? How do you operate here? What are your issues? What can we do together? And how do you find it? Everybody asks the same. When an Indonesian ambassador gets posted to Canberra, he'll say to close like-minded colleagues, what are they like? How do you get access? Is it all right? And what are the issues? What are the problems? And so it's the same thing. And I remember this particular ambassador who was ambassador of a country we should describe as fairly big, a country which has gone through, thankfully, significant change in January this year. I think you can work out who it is. And I said, what was the thing that you found the best and most interesting thing to do in Indonesia? And he said instantly, Indonesian youth. Spend as much time with young Indonesians as you can, because they are the most exciting cohort. Curious, a little bit mischievous and at times, you know, with a degree of confidence and everything else, which is lovely, which is reassuring, and they are the future in every way, because they're obviously, and they hold out the prospect of an exciting future. And I must say, my experience, even allowing for the COVID experience of the last 12 months, so I'm doing an event with Indonesia and Australian youth next week, for example, again, and I've done a couple in the last 5 or 6 weeks, was exactly that. It was reinvigorating, but it gave you a sense of where Indonesia was going because of young culture, young influence on society, and you could see it. And so you could see a very exciting continuation towards an end point of, you know, great success. And all that sounds a bit flaky, but I mean it very genuinely. So it's one of the memories I'll really take away from here, how great it was to work with such a great, self-confident, curious group of young people. And it's a tremendous asset. And of course, it starts to run out by 2030 because of the demographic shift. But it'll never run out. Yeah. Anyway, sorry, I've gone on too long. But they're the kind of things I'm talking to my successor about as well.
Thanks very much, Ambassador. Actually, I'm happy you pointed out youth. If you can point some of them towards the agriculture sector, that would be greatly appreciated. It's one of the areas I think we actually have a little bit of trouble. And if I can, before I just hand it back to you, but George, on behalf of the business community and the IABC, I'm sure we're all very happy to hear that you are hoping to do some continuing work, particularly around research and with think tanks. So we look forward to continuing engagement. Gary, over in a slightly different format and role. So thanks very much, Pat George.
Yeah, thank you, Pat John. And I'd like to second Pat John. I mean, we would really want to invite you to speak if you know when you have decided on the future of what activities you'll be doing. But just hearing from what you're saying, you know, and the think tank side, the research side, that we would really like to hear your thoughts, Ambassador Gary, in the future. Obviously, you've heard all the tributes, and everyone is very, very grateful for your service here in Indonesia, Indonesians and Australians. And obviously, you'll be continuing to more future successful endeavors that you have already achieved here and throughout your career, but in the future, you will obviously be in more successful endeavors. And I don't know about the rest of you, but I have I have a very special thing about Australian product that I really like, and that is music. And one of the biggest rock bands in the world is AC/DC. And
Oh, here we go.
AC/DC, you know, they came out with a new album, even, you know, in their very long career now, as they're probably in the 70s, they have a new album and it's hitting in the top 40. So in the great wise words of AC/DC, Ambassador Gary, the great rock band from the suburbs of Sydney, you know, for those who like to rock, we salute you. And you, Ambassador Gary, you have rocked throughout your career and you have achieved so much. And in Indonesia, you have rocked. You've made you've escorted the IACPA into entry into force. That is a very, very big deal. And for that, Ambassador Gary, we salute you. And so representing the board here, I see everyone on the board here and I see a lot of members. Again, this is an intimate setting, exclusive for members. And I can't mention everyone here, but I see Putri from International Internship. I see Frank Prakoso. I see Lita. I see a lot of people here. So representing our members and the board, again, Ambassador Gary, we bid you farewell, but I think we will continue to engage in your many endeavors to come. So we bid you farewell. Good luck, Ambassador Gary. We salute you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. I salute you as well. Thank you. Thanks, Patrick.
Thank you, sir. And that concludes.
No, thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Ambassador. And that concludes this special session of our farewell session to Ambassador Gary Quinlan. I'd like to thank the IABC Secretariat, Mas Arfat, Mas Fairley, and Bahana, who has prepared everything, and all the team and the board, Pak Todd Diaz from the embassy, who has supported us in facilitating this event, and everyone who has provided tribute remarks to Ambassador Gary, and all of our members who have joined us. Thank you for joining this special farewell session. Just an announcement, we're gonna have another webinar on the 15th of April on industrial and education engagement with Monash University. So Monash University on 15th April. Thank you, Monash Indonesia, for joining IABC. And again, thank you, Nelnet, Joe Egan, Nel International, for joining IABC. So with that, we conclude this session. Thank you, everyone. Have a good day. Ambassador Gary, farewell. We salute you. Good afternoon.
Healthy, Ambassador Gary. Stay healthy.
Well done. Yeah.
Bye, everyone.
Well done, George. Thank you. Bye, Gary.
Cheers.
Yeah, bye.